In this tutorial, we learn how to use Spring Bean profiles to configure different context in our Hello World Spring MVC application. These are the reasons to use Spring Bean definition profiles. It helps us with configuration management, environment-specific settings, feature toggle, customizing Bean initialization, testing scenarios, third-party integrations, simplified configuration. It reduces code duplication. It allows for scaling out our applications, and it enhances security configuration. Now we're going over to our course documentation, and we'll select our Spring Framework Review. In our Spring Framework Review, we will select using Bean definition profiles. And here we have the deeper explanation. For configurations, we can have different configurations for development, testing, and production so that we can switch between them. Related to that is environment-specific settings. We can use different databases or endpoints for development and production. In the feature toggle, we can enable or disable certain features or components based on the profile. We can also customize the Bean initialization based on the active profile. In our testing scenarios, we can have specific beans or configurations for testing purposes. Then, with integration with third-party external services such as APIs, we can have different profiles for different APIs. Then it also simplifies our configurations because we have a cleaner and more maintainable set of configuration files, and we can understand and manage our settings. It also helps with reducing code duplication, where we specify only the differences between environments. With application scaling, we have multiple deployment scenarios, and we can scale up by adjusting configurations based on the deployment environment. For security, we have settings that are often different between environments, so you can tailor your security configurations based on each environment. Then we have an overview of how to use Spring Bean definition profiles. So this is without Spring Boot. You can define your profiles in a class. So we have a development config and a production config. In XML, you can activate it by setting the profile attribute, or in your overall config in a Java class. You can also activate it on startup by setting your active profile. You can also define a default profile. And in our case, we're going to have an application properties file that specifies the active profile. Another option is the conditional on profile. It conditionally creates beans based on the active profiles. And there is testing. You activate your profile for your tests with Spring Runner, test config, active profile, test. In summary, I have Bean definition profiles for different environments, such as developing, testing, and production. And now we are going to look at our example in Eclipse. We'll start with the README file. We created a new Maven project, and we set up the parent, and we created the artifact ID. Then we update the pom.xml file with the Spring Web MVC dependency. So if we look at our pom.xml, we use the pom.xml from our Charity registration, and we simply add the dependency down here. Then we create the root context file, and this is our root context. We have our component scanner. We have Bean definitions defined for development and production, and each of that picks up the properties from different property definition files. And here is our application definition properties files and our application broad property file. And then we update our web.xml file. And as we see here, we specify in our web.xml which profile is active. We have our listener, we have our dispatcher servlet. Going back to our README, we also update our servlet context, use annotation configuration. We have a base package component scanner, and we include scanning the controller. Back to our README, we create the controller. Here is our hello controller, the greeting service, and we have the hello world and the greeting service. We see we pass in the name definition. So now we'll run our application. We'll select run as, run on server, Tomcat localhost A, make sure it's the only thing installed, finish. And there we have our hello dev world started, because that is the current active profile defined in web.xml. I'll leave the rest for self-study and go back to the documentation, play around with moving it over to Java classes instead of XML. And that concludes this tutorial. I will see you in the next one.